I was on Fox and Friends this weekend talking about this tweet from Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. He said, doctors should be able to write prescriptions for housing the same way they do for insulin or antibiotics. I forget where this clip starts, but let's go ahead and play the first clip.
Proposal to tackle the state's homelessness and antibiotics. Here to weigh in is California resident and radio talk show host Mike Slater. Mike, help me out here. Usually there's seems to be some rationale for something like this. I'm missing it here.
No, the Democrats have become really good lately at coming up with proposals that are so ridiculous, like so off the charts, that you don't even know where to begin on like deconstructing what they're talking about. So I think what he's getting at is that the old progressive idea that everyone has a right to a house. But first, fundamentally, you can't have a right to something that puts a burden or an obligation on someone else. There's no such thing as a right to a house. But it also fundamentally misses the problem here. The left, the progressives think that homelessness causes addiction and mental illness. But it's the exact opposite. It's addiction and mental illness that causes homelessness. So we're not getting at the root of the problem. You can't take someone who's high on meth and put him behind a door and say that the problem's solved. But that's what progressives are still trying to do. And of course, that requires more money and more taxes.
Okay, let me be honest here. First, I stole that first line from Jesse Kelly from a tweet from him. And then all that other insight got from Christopher Rufo from City Journal, who we've had on the show, and many other guests that we've had right here. So I was just reiterating things that I've learned here on The First. But I love Pete Hegseth. When he started off, they played that clip of the State of the State from Gavin Newsom talking about housing. And I love Pete. He goes, help me out here, Mike. He didn't even have like a question. That's what Jesse Kelly was talking about and what I mentioned there. It's like, I don't even know how, where do you even start with that? Now, on that later point about which comes first, homelessness or addiction, I think we've beaten that point to a pulp here. And I think people are starting to see through it, but not Newsom, obviously. There's a reason why Newsom is not seeing the truth of it, why he and others on the far left still think that housing first is the way to go. There's a very particular reason why. We'll get to that in a minute here. But here's the important part of the whole segment we did this weekend.
Mike, let's look at some numbers. So you've got 151,278 people experiencing homelessness in California, up more than 16% between 2018 and 2019. Why do you think California is having such a problem with homelessness, particularly in compared to some of these other states?
Yeah, because we're spending billions and billions, literally billions of dollars to fix the problem, and you're just subsidizing more of this behavior that's going to cause more of the problem and be more of a magnet for people across the country. Gavin Newsom, it's so weird. He comes across like this outsider who's coming in and really going to change the system. He's been in charge in a high level of California government for 23 years, including 8 years as the mayor of San Francisco when homelessness has started going through the roof even worse. So he's not going to solve anything. This is just more of the same failed ideas for decades here. You know, Bernie won Nevada, right? So we're all wondering what's going to happen to America if a socialist wins the presidency. We have it. It's right here in California. California's been run by socialists for decades already, and you're seeing the effect of it. That's just one metric that's terrible for California.
So I want to talk about that first point, the first point from that very handsome and articulate young man. So I want to talk about the attracting and the subsidizing of this broken behavior. So while I was in the hospital with our kid being born, I got back to reading Theodore Dalrymple's book, Life at the Bottom. So Theodore Dalrymple is awesome. He's one of my favorite writers. He's a prison doctor and psychiatrist. He worked in the worst slums in the inner cities in England. And in this book, he writes about the culture of people who live, life at the bottom. Really, really great book. You got to read it. But I just happened to be reading this weekend the chapter about public housing. And he starts off telling these stories of a story where he went to a town in England, and it was just ugly building after decrepit park and deserted building, and it was just horrible and depressing. And he went into a store, this was like in the 50s or 60s, and he went into a store and he told the shop owner, he said, man, it's just a shame about the war. He thought all this was caused by the Nazis dropping bombs. But the shopkeeper said, war had nothing to do with it. It was the city council. And he goes on, he tells his experience working with people in these projects, and he's telling these stories to a famous architect, all right, one of the famous architects who built these ugly project buildings that have turned into slums. And he told about the people who live there and the horrible things they do and the bad choices they've made. And the architect said, yes, but do sties make pigs or do pigs make sties? Think about that. Do sties make pigs or do pigs make sties? Interesting question. Crudely put, but interesting question. Do sties make pigs or do pigs make sties? I want to make an argument here. Both are true. There's an element of both. But I want to make the argument that sties make pigs too. In the sense that there's incentives that, there's structures that are set up that incentivize certain behavior. This is what I mean. The government builds public housing, right? But there's only a limited supply of it. So there's only so much. So they say, okay, who gets this housing? Well, it's got to go to people who have the highest need, right? Who needs it the most? And Dalrymple looked at this and he said, not looked at it, he works within this system. And he said, yeah, because of that, a kind of arms race in social pathology has developed. So patients would go to him and they'd ask him to write a letter for, like a letter of recommendation to get in a public housing unit. Now, when you write a letter of recommendation for like a job, you expect the person to write a letter about how great you are and how you're very punctual and you work hard and you take initiative and you do all these good things. Write a letter of recommendation. In the real world, with normal free market, dare I say Bernie Sanders capitalist incentives, is for the person to write good things about you. But in the perverse incentived world of public housing, it's quite the opposite. Here's what Dalrymple said. He said, in these missives, these letters, my patients tell me I should emphasize their alcoholism or drug addiction, their bad temper, and tendency to assault those around them. The consequence, plainly, of a lack of proper accommodation. They don't have a nice enough house, so this is why they just start beating people up. I should mention their repeated overdoses, the fact that they resort to tranquilizers obtained illegally, that they've had several abortions and are now pregnant for the 5th time, that they've had 3 violent and drunken boyfriends in succession, and that they gamble their money uncontrollably. In not a single case has anyone ever asked me to write that he is a decent, hardworking, honorable citizen who would make a good tenant. That would send him straight to the bottom of the waiting list. Think about it. If Dalrymple, the psychiatrist, if he said, here's a person who has a really tough life, used to make really bad decisions, but is now doing a lot better for themselves and is working hard, showing up on time, broke their addiction, but just needs, then they right to the bottom of the list. Because this guy over here is way, or this woman or whatever, way worse. Super a drug addict, living on the streets, hasn't been ever made good decisions. That person has greater need than this person. So, oh, doctor, can you emphasize what a terrible person I've been and what bad decisions I've been making? Free housing just subsidizes more of that broken behavior and perpetuates that broken culture. Slater Crusaders, thanks for watching the first on YouTube. If you want more, like, subscribe. We got plenty.